Everything started with a canceled birthday cake. A single mother trembling at a bakery counter, whispering that she couldn't afford her son's order anymore. She thought no one was watching. She was wrong. A billionaire and his 8-year-old daughter saw everything. And from that moment, nothing in their lives would ever be the same. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Robinson Moore stepped inside, with his 8-year-old daughter Claire skipping at his side. The warm scent of vanilla, sugar, and freshly baked pastries drifted through the air, wrapping the room in a comforting sweetness that made Claire inhale dramatically, her mouth forming a little wow as her eyes lit up with excitement. "Dad, look," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve as though the glass display of cakes and pastries were diamonds. "This bakery is magical." Robinson allowed a small smile, rare, gentle, almost hesitant. 3 years ago, smiles had been effortless for him. 3 years ago, he was a different man. Before death stole his wife, the only softness he ever knew. Since then, smiles came only for Claire, only when he tried hard. "All right, cupcake," he murmured, patting her head. "Show me the cake you want." Claire pressed her palms to the glass, studying the cakes with the seriousness of a jeweler examining gemstones. Her blonde curls bounced as she leaned forward. "It has to be perfect. Mom always said birthdays deserve cake that makes the heart happy." Robinson swallowed, the words piercing him gently. Claire said things like that often, innocently, lovingly. He lived with the ache of it daily. Before he could respond, a voice from the counter caught his attention. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but your card is being declined again." Robinson looked up. A black woman in her early 30s stood at the register, holding a trembling wallet in one hand and a worried expression in the other. Her son, small, sweet-faced, curly-haired, no more than 8, stood beside her holding a simple catalog picture of a chocolate birthday cake. His eyes were bright but cautious, the way children looked when they were trying not to hope too much. "It's okay," the woman said softly, forcing a smile that cracked around the edges. "Just cancel the order." The baker paused. "Are you sure? We can." "It's fine," she interrupted gently, placing the picture on the counter. "Thank you." The boy's fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. He lowered his head, trying to hide the sadness gathering in his eyes. He didn't pout, didn't complain, just stood there quietly, swallowing disappointment like he'd learned to do it too many times already. Claire's body stilled beside her father, her big blue eyes locked onto the boy's face, watching how carefully he blinked, like he was scared his tears would fall if he opened his eyes too wide. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling with something heartfelt. "He's sad." Robinson placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart." But she shook her head and stepped backward, her gaze fixed on the boy. Something silent, something gentle passed between the two children, recognition. Then Claire gasped softly and tugged her father's arm so firmly he stumbled a little. "Dad, that's Evan." Robinson blinked. "What?" "That's Evan from my old class," she whispered urgently. "He used to sit right behind me. He shared his crayons with me once when I forgot mine. And then one day he just didn't come anymore." Claire's voice softened with worry. "Dad, why isn't he in school anymore?" "I don't know," Robinson said honestly. Claire pulled him again, this time dragging him toward the far corner of the bakery, far enough that Evan and his mother wouldn't hear. When she spoke, her voice shook with the kind of empathy only a child, raised by a kind mother, could possess. "Dad, he doesn't get a birthday cake," she said, her eyes brimming. "Mom would never let that happen to any kid." Robinson inhaled sharply. His late wife, kind, gentle, selfless, always saw people, always cared. Claire carried that same softness, the same unshakable instinct to help. And he'd lost that part of himself long ago. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "we don't know their situation. It might not be our place." "Dad," Claire's voice was barely a whisper. No kid should lose a birthday. The heartbreak in her tone pierced clean through the armor he'd spent years building. Claire looked up at him, pleading, not with stubbornness but with pure, honest compassion. And that was the moment he realized he never really said no to her. Not when she looked like that. He let out a quiet breath. "All right, I'll pay for it." Claire's face lit instantly. "Really?" But anonymously, he added quickly, "They don't need to know it came from us." She nodded eagerly. "Okay." Robinson approached the counter while Laura was helping Evan into his coat. He tapped the baker's shoulder discreetly. "I'd like to pay for the cake she canceled." The baker froze. "Sir, which one was it?" Robinson asked, slipping out a black card. "Chocolate, medium-sized, custom message," the baker replied softly. "The boy's birthday is tomorrow." Robinson nodded. Have it delivered first thing in the morning. Add a small balloon bouquet, and make the cake special. He didn't need thanks. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because Claire was right. No child deserved disappointment on their birthday. Once he paid, he quietly ushered Claire out of the bakery. She looked back once, watching Evan and his mother walk out with empty hands but forced smiles. Claire's heart squeezed in a way no one taught her. She was born with it. The next morning, in a modest apartment across Toronto, Laura opened her front door to find a beautifully decorated cake box sitting on the doormat. Attached was a small tag, "Happy Birthday, Evan," from someone who cares. No name, no explanation, just kindness wrapped in frosting. Laura stood there frozen, her eyes filling instantly. She covered her mouth, whispering a shaky breath of disbelief. Evan peered around her, saw the cake, and gasped. "Mom, is that for me?" Laura nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, baby. Someone wanted you to have your birthday cake." Evan's face burst into the brightest smile she'd seen since his father died. He hugged the cake box like it was treasure. For once, someone remembered him. Someone cared. She sank to her knees and wrapped him in her arms. Evan's laughter filled the tiny apartment, and for a moment the crushing weight of loss lifted. A week later, Claire's own birthday approached. She was buzzing with excitement, talking non-stop about decorations and music and what dress she wanted to wear. But the moment she found her father in his office, sipping coffee and reviewing documents, she marched straight up to him with determination. "Dad," she said, climbing onto the chair across from him, "I want to invite Evan and his mom to my party." Robinson lowered the folder in his hand. "Why?" "Because," she took a breath, her voice soft but firm. "Because I think Evan probably misses his old life. If he comes, maybe he'll remember that he still has people who care." Robinson stared at her for several long seconds. Claire was 8, but sometimes she spoke like she had an old soul, a heart that saw more than he ever could. Finally he nodded. "All right, I'll invite them." He went back to the bakery later that day, spoke quietly to the owner, and asked for Laura's address. A simple cream-colored invitation card was delivered to her apartment the next morning, elegant yet warm. Inside the envelope was a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. "If you wish to know who paid for the cake, attend the birthday party with your son." Laura read it twice, then again. Her heart thudded softly. She didn't know who would be so generous, but she knew one thing for certain. Whoever it was, they changed her son's birthday. And for that, she could never ignore the invitation. She looked down at Evan, who held the card carefully as if it were gold. "Mom, can we go?" he asked, eyes full of hope. Laura looked at him, then at the elegant card again. "Yes," she whispered, "we're going." And somewhere across the city, Claire Moore jumped up and down with joy when her father told her the invitation had been delivered. She didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness, that cake that was never meant to be, was about to change all of their lives forever. Laura Nelson stood in front of the Moore mansion, with her hand resting lightly on Evan's shoulder. She had almost turned back at least 5 times on the quiet drive through the affluent Toronto neighborhood, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and disbelief. The mansion looked like something out of a magazine. Tall windows catching the late morning light, perfectly trimmed hedges lining the walkway, and a fountain in the center courtyard that shimmered under the sun. She adjusted Evan's small collar, her fingers trembling slightly. "You sure you're okay, baby?" she whispered. Evan nodded eagerly, gripping the invitation card in his hand like it was a golden ticket. "Yes, Mom." That alone steadied her. If Evan wanted to come, then she could face whatever waited inside. She rang the doorbell. A moment later, the doors swung open and suddenly Claire Moore appeared, dressed in a pale blue birthday dress, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran forward. "Evan," she squealed, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. The force of her joy almost knocked him backward, but Evan smiled and hugged her back in return. Laura felt something warm bloom in her chest, watching the pure innocence of it. "You came," Claire said breathlessly. "Dad, they're here." Robinson Moore appeared from behind her, wearing a crisp navy suit with the top button undone, giving him an effortless but controlled look. His expression softened slightly when he saw who had arrived, though it still held that distant restraint of a man unused to showing too much. "Ms. Nelson," he greeted politely. "Hi," Laura said, trying to steady her voice. He nodded once, stepping aside. "Please come in." Inside, the mansion was warm and bright, filled with children laughing, parents chatting, and staff carrying trays of pastries and mini sandwiches. Balloons in pastel colors filled the corners of the wide living area, and a birthday banner stretched across the wall in elegant gold lettering. "Happy birthday, Claire." "I want to go play with Claire," Evan whispered, looking up at his mom with a hopeful grin. Laura nodded. "Go on." The children dashed off instantly, two little streaks of excitement disappearing into the decorated play area. There was something tender about watching them run side by side. Two kids who had drifted apart because of life's weight, now reconnecting like nothing had changed. Robinson cleared his throat softly. "Would you like something to drink?" "Oh, no. I'm fine." "Thank you," Laura said, then braced herself. "Actually, can we talk just for a moment?" His gaze flicked toward her, measuring. "Of course." They stepped away from the crowd, near a quiet corner of the room where sunlight streamed softly through a tall window. Laura clasped her hands together, grounding herself. "I figured out you were the mystery helper behind my son's birthday cake." Robinson exhaled, his eyes flickering briefly with something almost embarrassed. "I suppose you want an explanation?" She shook her head. "No, I owe a thank you. That cake, it meant more than you can imagine. Evan hasn't smiled like that in months. Whoever paid for it gave us something we couldn't give ourselves that day." Robinson looked away, jaw tightening as though he wasn't used to being appreciated. "It was nothing," he murmured. "No," she replied quietly. "It wasn't nothing." They stood in a brief silence, watching their children laugh from across the room. Evan was already showing Claire a card trick, while Claire demonstrated hers with exaggerated flourishes. Robinson's voice broke the silence. "Claire told me Evan used to be in her class. One day he just wasn't there. She was worried." Laura swallowed. "I know. I should have let the school know, but things got overwhelming." "What happened?" he asked, his tone soft but distant, like he cared but wasn't sure how to show it. Laura inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "My husband died last year, cancer. We spent everything. Savings, retirement, insurance, trying to keep him alive. When he was still working, he wanted me to stay and manage the home, so I was not working. When he passed, we were left with nothing, not even a place to stay." Robinson's eyes lowered, not pity. Something deeper, heavier. "We were homeless for 3 weeks," she continued, her voice trembling. "Couch hopping between friends. I just needed to keep a roof over Evan's head. I finally found a cheap basement apartment and a nanny job that barely pays enough for rent and groceries." She looked toward Evan, who was laughing as Claire tried and failed to shuffle a deck of cards. "I pulled him out of that school to a closer one. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. He loved it there." Robinson nodded slowly, absorbing every word. It wasn't the kind of story he heard often. His world didn't include people losing everything, scraping by to survive. But something in Laura's voice, raw, honest, unguarded, reached him. "Your husband insisted you didn't work?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said with a sad smile. "He worked for a reputable company. He wanted me home with Evan. I studied culinary arts before we got married, but I never used my degree. I never thought I'd need to." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of children's laughter echoing across the mansion. Robinson cleared his throat again. "Laura, you said you studied culinary arts." She nodded. "Yes, it was my passion. Still is." He hesitated. "Can you cook?" A small, confused smile crossed her lips. "I'd like to think so." He looked slightly uncomfortable, as though the words he was about to say were unfamiliar or too generous for him. "I'm looking for a head cook," he said slowly. "Live in, full-time, high salary, benefits, you wouldn't have to worry about rent." And he nodded toward Evan. He could return to his old school. Laura's breath caught. I don't understand." "You need stability," he replied. "And I need someone I can trust in my home. Someone good with children, someone who cares." "And you want that someone to be me?" she asked, her voice nearly cracking. "You're looking for a better-paying job, aren't you?" he said, reading her expression easily. A wave of emotion washed over her: relief, gratitude, shock, hope. It flooded her so quickly her knees weakened. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am." "So?" he asked. "I'll take it," she said, almost breathless. "Gladly, I'll take it." For the first time that day, Robinson smiled, small, subtle, but real. "Good, Claire will be happy." She didn't have a chance to ask what he meant, because at that moment Claire came racing toward them, dragging Evan with her. "Dad, Miss Laura. Evan says he knows magic tricks." Robinson raised an eyebrow. "Does he now?" "Yep," Evan said proudly. Laura watched the children with a full heart, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Miss Laura?" Claire said excitedly, "Can you and Evan come live with us? Dad said you might." Laura blinked, stunned, before glancing at Robinson, who gave her a small nod. Claire squealed and hugged her tightly before Laura could even answer. This is the best birthday ever. The rest of the party passed in a blur of joy. The children were inseparable, playing together, eating together, laughing until their sides hurt, and through it all, Laura watched Robinson through fresh eyes. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a father with walls built high, a man who didn't know how to be soft anymore until his daughter forced him to care again. By evening, the decision had been made. Laura resigned from her place of work, packed the few belongings she and Evan owned. Clothes, books, Evan's drawings, her old recipe notebook. When they returned to the mansion later that night, Claire ran into the driveway barefoot, dancing with excitement. "You're here. You're really here." Evan grinned and stepped out of the car. Claire grabbed his hand as though she had no intention of ever letting go. Laura followed behind, her eyes lifting toward the towering mansion that would become her new home, her new chance, her new beginning. Robinson appeared at the doorway, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but undeniably relieved. "Welcome," he said simply. And just like that, Laura Nelson and her son stepped into a world nothing like the one they came from. Two families under one roof, two lives that never should have crossed, now colliding in a way none of them could have predicted. Laura woke before dawn every morning, long before the first light touched the city skyline. The Moore mansion was quiet at that hour, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. She had always believed kitchens had a soul of their own, and this one, with its marble counters, tall windows, and shelves lined with herbs and spices, felt like a place she could breathe again. Her first days working in the mansion were a careful balance of learning the routine and creating one of her own. She prepped meals with meticulous care, chopping vegetables with rhythmic precision, testing new recipes she'd once practiced in school but never had the chance to serve. She experimented with flavors: basil and tomato omelets, honey-glazed carrots, lemon rosemary chicken, soft pastries that melted at the slightest touch. And she always made sure Claire's breakfast plate had something a little fun. Apple slices shaped like hearts, pancakes with smiley faces, tiny cinnamon rolls arranged like a flower. The staff adored her almost immediately. She wasn't just polite. She was warm. She remembered everyone's name within 2 days. Amira the housekeeper, Grant the driver, Tessa the scheduler. She thanked them for small things. She asked how their days were going. It was the kind of simple kindness that spread quietly through the mansion, softening edges that had long been sharp. And Robinson noticed. He noticed the way she moved around the kitchen with a rare blend of confidence and gentleness. He noticed how she organized the pantry without being asked, labeling jars with neat handwriting. He noticed how she studied recipes late at night with a little crease between her brows, determined to perfect them. He noticed her discipline, steady, dependable, almost effortless in its grace. And he noticed the things she likely didn't realize she did, humming softly as she cooked, checking on the children between tasks, leaving small notes of encouragement for the staff. She reminded him of warmth, of life before grief had turned everything cold, and that unsettled him in ways he didn't expect. Claire took to Laura instantly, like she had been waiting her whole life for a woman like her to fill the space her mother once filled. Laura read bedtime stories with silly voices, brushed Claire's hair into little curls in the morning, and even taught her how to knead dough properly in the afternoons. Evan and Claire became inseparable within a week. They had movie nights in the living room wrapped in blankets, first animated films, then family comedies, eventually superhero movies where they both argued passionately over which hero was the best. They did their homework together at the dining table, pencils tapping, pages turning, whispering questions and sharing erasers. Sometimes, Laura found them curled up in the garden reading books or racing through the yard. Giggling breathlessly, Robinson watched them with quiet fascination. It had been years since the house echoed with that kind of joy. He also watched Laura with growing awareness. He saw her comfort Evan after a difficult day at school, pulling him into her arms and rubbing his back until his small shoulders relaxed. He saw how she listened, not just to respond, but to understand. He saw how Claire ran to her with unfiltered trust, the kind only given to people who felt safe. And then there were the meals. Robinson sat at the head of the dining table every evening, lifting a fork to taste dishes that reminded him of things he thought he had lost. The flavors were rich but gentle, seasoned with something more than spices, crafted with intention, with heart. It wasn't just the food that warmed him. It was the care behind it. He hadn't realized how much he missed coming home to meals that made him feel human again. Memories of his late wife came in waves. Her laugh in their old kitchen, her humming, her way of making even the simplest dinner feel like a moment worth savoring. Laura didn't replace those memories. She awakened them, and that confused him, scared him, and softened him all at once. Laura, in turn, began to see through Robinson's silence. Beneath the controlled exterior, beneath the faint lines of exhaustion on his face, she saw a man carrying unspoken grief, a man who had loved deeply and lost painfully, a man who hadn't allowed himself to truly feel anything for years. She saw that he parented Claire not out of duty but out of a fierce, protective love shaped by guilt and fear of failing her. She saw the loneliness in the way he lingered in the doorway during movie nights, wanting to join but never crossing the threshold until the children invited him. Tension grew between them, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and undeniable. It pulsed in shared glances across the kitchen, in long pauses during late-night talks, in the way he lingered after dinner asking about her day, in the way she hesitated before walking past him, aware of the sudden closeness between them. Both felt something, but neither dared name it. Respect held them back. Grief held them back. Fear held them back. Then the storm came. It began with heavy rain hitting, the windows like angry fingers tapping against glass. Thunder rippled across the sky in long, groaning waves. The lights flickered once, then steadied, but the house felt colder somehow. Claire never liked storms. Her mother used to hold her through them. Laura found her in her room, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "Sweetheart," Laura whispered, immediately wrapping her arms around her. Hey, you're okay." Claire clung to her desperately, shaking. "I miss her," she choked. "I miss Mommy. I miss her so much." Laura stroked her hair, her heart breaking. "I know, baby. I know you do." The storm outside cracked sharply and Claire sobbed harder, burying her face in Laura's shoulder. "You're safe," Laura murmured. "I'm here. I promise you're safe." She rocked the little girl gently, the same way she used to rock Evan when he was younger. Claire's small fingers twisted into Laura's shirt, refusing to let go. What Laura didn't know was that Robinson had been standing in the hallway, frozen. He had come to check on Claire after hearing the thunder, but what he saw stopped him cold. Laura cradling his daughter with the tenderness only a mother could give. Claire gripping her like she was the only person who could make the world feel whole again. He saw his daughter allowing herself to break, something she had never done around him because he always tried to be strong for her, even when he was falling apart inside. He saw Laura giving Claire the comfort he couldn't give, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how. And then, unexpectedly, he broke, silently at first. His shoulders lowered. His breath trembled. His eyes stung. 3 years of suppressed grief cracked open in an instant. He leaned against the doorframe, running a hand over his face as tears slipped down. He didn't sob. He didn't make a sound. But everything inside him shifted painfully, releasing emotions he had buried so deep he'd forgotten how they felt. Laura finally sensed someone there and looked up, still holding Claire. Their eyes met. Robinson looked stripped bare. No walls, no mask, just a man grieving his wife. And seeing his daughter, finally comforted in a way he could never manage. Laura's heart clenched. She didn't speak. She didn't let go of Claire. But her gaze held his, gentle and understanding, telling him without words that he wasn't alone in this. He stepped into the room slowly, almost cautiously, and sat beside them. Claire, noticing him through watery eyes, reached out a hand. He took it instantly, squeezing tight as another tear slipped free. Laura kept her arm around Claire, her other hand gently resting near Robinson's. Not touching, just close enough for him to know she was there. The storm raged outside, but somehow the room felt calmer. Eventually, Claire fell asleep, exhausted from crying, curled between them. Robinson let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick, "for being here for her." Laura swallowed. She just needed someone to hold her. Anyone would have done the same. "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone. Not like you." Silence filled the room, soft and heavy, but not uncomfortable this time. Robinson looked at her, and for the first time since she moved in, he didn't seem distant. "I haven't seen this house feel like a home in years," he said, his voice raw, Until you came. Laura's breath hitched, her heart pounding. Not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. And in that moment, the walls between them didn't fall completely. But they cracked. And that was enough. Laura woke up earlier these days, not because she had to, but because the house felt different. Now warmer, softer, less like the hollow mansion she had first stepped into, and more like a place where life pulsed in every hallway. Robinson, in his quiet way, had begun meeting her halfway in this new rhythm they were forming. No declarations. No awkward silences. Just a slow, natural closeness that neither of them acknowledged out loud. It was in the way he lingered near the kitchen when she cooked breakfast, pretending to check his phone but stealing glances at her. It was in the way he walked slower when they all returned from school drop-offs, letting her thoughts spill into the air, listening in a way that felt unmistakably personal. And it was in the late evenings, when the house was, asleep and she sat with a warm cup of tea, only to hear his footsteps joining her every time without fail. Claire and Evan, without being told, also sensed something shifting in the atmosphere. They had begun calling each other birthday twins, a title they announced proudly to anyone who would listen. They weren't actually born on the same day, only the same month. Few weeks apart, but to them, that was close enough. The name stuck, becoming an inside joke, a bond that spoke louder than the small number of months they had known each other. Their closeness brought Laura and Robinson together more often, whether intentionally or not. Grocery shopping, for example, became a ritual. Robinson insisted on joining her, saying he needed fresh air. But he always ended up holding her basket, asking about spices, listening to her stories about culinary school. He had a strange fascination with watching her choose produce, as if studying her methodical care told him something deeper about who she was. Sometimes at the supermarket, strangers would assume they were a couple. Laura would blush and correct them gently, while Robinson simply stayed quiet, offering a faint smile as if the idea wasn't something he entirely disliked. Late-night kitchen talks became their second ritual. She would experiment with sauces or test new dessert ideas, and he would sit on the high stool across from her, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking more human and less like the billionaire everyone feared. He began attending school events with her, too. It started with a parent-teacher meeting. Then came Evan's mini-music recital, where Robinson sat beside her, clapping louder than most parents. And when Claire won a small art award, Laura had been the one to take photos, because Robinson nudged her arm gently and said, "Your family." The kids noticed everything, of course. Claire grinned whenever she saw Laura and her father together. Evan nudged her arm and whispered things like, "I think your dad really likes my mom." And though they were still young, they understood enough to hope, secretly and not so secretly, that the adults would eventually say out loud what was becoming so obvious. But the turning point didn't come from the children. It came one evening a few months after Laura had moved in, when Robinson stood by the balcony rail watching the sunset. Laura approached with 2 cups of hot chocolate, one for him, one for herself. They stood there silently for a moment, the warm drink in their hands, the cool Canadian air brushing their cheeks, and the weight of the moment pressing into the quiet. He didn't look at her when he spoke. I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. Her fingers tightened around the mug. She didn't push him. She never had. "But I do now," he said, barely above a whisper. "With you." The confession was simple, human, real. It trembled out of him, but it didn't feel rushed or uncertain. It felt earned. Laura's breath caught. Her heart beat too quickly, too loudly. "Robinson, you don't have to say anything now," he said, turning to her finally, his voice steady but his eyes vulnerable. "I just needed you to know." She didn't speak. Instead, she touched his hand, a small gesture, but it was enough. And from that moment, they began dating quietly, privately, slowly. They agreed not to say anything to the kids yet. They wanted to be sure to build something stable, something strong. But Claire and Evan, brilliant in their innocence, knew anyway. They noticed the way Robinson's hand sometimes brushed. They noticed how Laura's face lit up differently when he walked into a room. They whispered plans to each other, forming a little conspiracy of hope. And for a while, everything seemed perfect, until Laura received the email that threw her into a storm of confusion. A prestigious restaurant in Vancouver she had applied to months ago wanted her as a specialty chef, A rare position, high-paying, career-changing. She stared at the email for a long time that night. Her heart clenched because part of her felt seen, recognized for her skill and passion. Another part of her felt sick, because she knew the offer would pull her away from the life she was building here. From Robinson, from Claire, from stability, from love. When she finally told Robinson, she expected anger, or fear, or persuasion. Instead, he nodded slowly, jaw tight but eyes filled with respect. "You deserve it," he said softly, "and you should take it if that's what you want." "You think I should leave?" she whispered. "I think," he answered carefully, "that I can't ask you to stay just because I'm afraid of losing you." The honesty made her stomach twist. It would have been easier if he had begged or argued, but he didn't, and somehow that made her love him even more. She spent the next few days conflicted, torn between gratitude for the opportunity and the ache of imagining a future without him. She watched Evan play with Claire. She saw how the children fit together naturally, how they shared secrets and jokes like siblings. She saw Robinson watching her from the doorway when she cooked, his expression soft and quietly longing, and she realized something undeniable. She didn't want a life without them. One evening, she found Robinson reading in the living room, Claire asleep on his lap like she used to do years ago with her mother. Laura sat beside him and took a deep breath. "I'm staying," she said. His head snapped up. "Laura?" "I'm staying," she repeated, voice steady. "But I'm not giving up my independence. I want to take part-time culinary consultancy work. I want my own income, my own purpose. But I also want this, you, the kids, this place." Relief washed over him slowly, deeply, as if thawing a part of him that had been frozen for years. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into a silent embrace. Life settled into its new form after that. Days filled with shared meals, laughter echoing up the grand staircases, evening walks, family movie nights where the kids always insisted on sitting between them. And for the first time since his wife passed, Robinson looked ahead and saw a future instead of an empty hallway of grief. The proposal came during dinner, a simple evening meal Laura had prepared with the kids helping. Claire mixed batter for a dessert. Evan set the table carefully, humming. Everything felt normal, ordinary, beautiful, until Claire and Evan walked out holding a cake. Not just any cake. A white fondant cake with soft golden lettering that read, "From 2 families to 1. Laura blinked, stunned. Then she turned and saw Robinson kneeling beside her, quiet, nervous, hopeful. "Laura Nelson," he said, voice shaking with emotion he didn't bother hiding. "Would you let us be a family? Would you marry me?" Tears rushed into her eyes. She didn't need to think. Not anymore. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The children shrieked with joy, hugging them both in a tangle of tiny arms and laughter. The wedding was grand, not because of luxury, but because of love. Claire wore a tiny white dress and held a bouquet of baby's breath. Evan walked beside her proudly in a small tuxedo, both of them serving as little bride and groom, their smiles bright enough to light the room. The vows were emotional. Laura smiled. Robinson broke down halfway through his, and when they kissed, the guests clapped louder than the music. Weeks later, on a quiet beach during a short family vacation, Claire and Evan ran ahead, kicking water and squealing as the wind swirled around them. Laura and Robinson walked hand in hand behind them, their fingers intertwined, their hearts steady and full. "We're a family now," the kids shouted together, voices echoing across the waves. Laura leaned her head on Robinson's shoulder, and for the first time in years he felt whole, and she felt home. The Moore household had changed in ways none of them could have imagined. A year had slipped by softly, beautifully, woven with laughter, late-night cuddles, school projects, movie marathons, flower fights in the kitchen, and dozens of tiny memories that made up their new life as a blended family. Laura stood by the nursery window, her hand resting on her very round belly, watching the first snowflakes of winter drift past the glass. Claire and Evan were in the hallway, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to pick the bedtime story. Their voices had grown a bit older, their personalities more confident, their bond unbreakable. She smiled to herself. She had never thought her life could hold this much peace. Behind her, warm hands slid around her waist. Robinson kissed the curve of her shoulder, his lips lingering there like he still couldn't believe she was real. "You okay?" he whispered. "Just thinking," she murmured, leaning back into him. This time last year, everything was different. He rested his chin gently against her neck. And somehow, he said softly, it all changed for the better. He was right. She wasn't the struggling single mom anymore, scraping coins together to afford rent and baking simple pancakes for Evan's birthdays. She was a wife, a mother, a woman rediscovering her passion and identity. She was running small culinary workshops part-time, working with restaurants as a consultant, and still making home feel alive with her cooking. Most of all, she was loved with a depth that still startled her. A sudden knock rattled the door. "Mom, Dad," Claire shouted. Evan said he heard the baby kick. "No, I didn't," Evan protested. "I said I thought maybe okay, yes, I did." Laura laughed and let them into the room. The kids rushed to her side, hands pressing eagerly against her belly. "Mom, is he awake?" Claire asked, eyes wide. "Let's see," Laura said. As if on cue, the baby nudged gently beneath her skin. Evan gasped. "Whoa, he's really there." Robinson chuckled behind them. "He's been there for 9 months, buddy." "Yeah, but now he's saying hello," Evan beamed. Claire patted Laura's bump and whispered dramatically, "Hi, baby brother. This is your big sister speaking. You're joining the best family ever." Laura's eyes softened. She touched Claire's cheek. "He's lucky to have you." Later that night, the kids were tucked in, the house quiet. Robinson and Laura lay under warm blankets, snow falling steadily outside their bedroom window. He brushed a kiss to her temple. "You ready for baby?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said with a nervous laugh. "Are you ready?" He smiled, eyes glowing with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "I've been ready since the day I realized I wanted my life with you." She curled against him, grateful, peaceful, and exhausted in the way only a very pregnant woman could be. By sunrise, everything changed. Laura felt the first contraction just as Evan and Claire were eating breakfast. It wasn't intense at first, just a deep ache. But when the second and third followed quickly, Robinson didn't hesitate. "Everyone in the car," he said, voice steady but eyes wild with excitement and panic. "Is the baby coming now?" Evan squealed. "Probably," Laura breathed through a contraction. "Someone get the hospital bag!" Claire screamed like a tiny commander. The house erupted in chaos. Beautiful, hilarious chaos. As they rushed out the door. Hours later, Laura lay in the warm glow of a private hospital room, a small bundle resting against her chest. Her eyes were wet, her breath uneven, her heart overflowing. The baby boy slept peacefully, wrapped snug in a pale blue blanket. Robinson sat beside her, looking at their newborn son as if seeing a miracle. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He looks like you," she teased softly. "He looks like us," he corrected, voice thick with emotion. The door burst open. Evan and Claire tiptoed inside, despite the fact that they were told to wait outside. "Can we see him?" Claire asked breathlessly. "Careful," Laura said, lifting the baby gently. The children gathered around the bed, awe in their eyes as they looked at their tiny brother. Evan reached out a careful finger to touch the baby's hand, and the little boy instinctively wrapped his fingers around it. "He likes me," Evan whispered, eyes glowing. "He loves you," Laura said. "What's his name?" Claire asked. Robinson looked at Laura. Laura nodded. Robinson turned to the kids. "His name is Elias James Moore." Claire clapped a hand over her mouth. "I love it." Evan looked proudly at the baby. "Welcome home, Elias," and in that moment, crowded hospital room. Winter light pouring in, love filling every corner. Laura felt something ache beautifully inside her. She had lost so much once. But now she had a family so full it was almost overwhelming. Robinson wrapped an arm carefully around her shoulder, kissing her hair. "We're complete," he murmured. Laura leaned into him, their newborn curled warm in her arms, their older children glowing with new big sibling pride. "Yes," she whispered, brushing a finger along Elias's cheek. "We really are. Thank you for being part of Whispers of Hope. Your love and support mean more than words. Together we're spreading light, one whisper at a time."